Deshaun Watson. There's been a lot of talk about, especially when Joe Flacco was, and this was something we were not going to entertain at the time because season was still ongoing. There was a lot of positivity, and this just felt like while relevant topic, it felt like a negative topic that neither of us were ready to really talk about because we didn't want to push what we felt was negative narrative around such a positive team and positive experience. Mm-hmm. But now that the season's over, it's still a relevant topic and it's still worth visiting. Derek, do you think it's two-parter? Mm-hmm. Number one, do you think Deshaun Watson will be the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns next year? And part two is, should Deshaun Watson be the starting quarterback next year?
Yeah, so part one, yes, because you have to. I mean, I don't think that's, we could talk about it, but there's really not a realistic option that he's not, unless he's just not healthy, which is that's a different story. But yes to both questions, because should he, yeah, I mean, you traded for him to be, and you're paying him to be your starting quarterback. Yeah, he should be. Once you break into the details of it, and this ain't gonna be as long, but we're gonna evaluate Deshaun Watson the same way we're evaluating Baker Mayfield. Like, that's the same thing. So let's talk about it. Deshaun Watson traded to the Cleveland Browns. You have the suspension. He didn't play since 2020. Which is just for context, his last season with the Texans, 70.2 completion percentage, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Awesome. Like, great. One of the best quarterbacks in the league. And the Browns traded for him the 2022 season, 58.2 completion percentage, 7 touchdowns, 5 picks, 6 games played, right? Now, in all fairness to Deshaun, that was because of suspension, not injury, which is what I'll get to here in a second. And I guess it's not fairness because he put the suspension on himself. That was his own doing. Not here to get into that, just talking about him as a quarterback on the team. So that was his first year, and it was rough, had some good moments at times, right? It was enough to where we were like, okay, like we think he can come back and still be good. And then this year comes around, and Deshaun Watson plays in 6 games for the Cleveland Browns, and stat-wise, 61.4 completion percentage, so that's improved. 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Problem is, it was 6 games. So, my thing here with Deshaun, and, to your question, should he, will he? Yes. And yes. Like, I don't care if you hate Deshaun Watson, I don't care if you love him. That's just the reality. Like, the Browns are kind of trapped. Like, Deshaun Watson is going to be the guy, at least for one more year. But here's what I will say. Tristan, this is, the 2021 season for Baker is the 2024 season for Deshaun Watson. This is make or break. This is the year. Like, you have to find out on Deshaun Watson this season. And here's the reality on the matter. I don't think it's more so play. Like, obviously that has a part in it, like how he plays. But what I saw from Deshaun Watson this year, and again, if you just listen to the national media narrative, sports media narrative, then you just think Deshaun Watson's incompetent, he sucks, and he's the worst quarterback in the NFL, and he should never play again, and he sucks. Right? Forget all the off-the-field stuff. Like, if you just listen to people talking about how he plays, they'll have you convinced that he's just a horrible, atrocious quarterback. And that's just not the case. Deshaun Watson this season showed a lot of really good things. He showed mobility. At times this year, you saw, I wouldn't even say just glimpses, but really good moments of that guy coming back. The Titans game, the Ravens game, just different points in the season where you saw really, really good things. Now, for me, Tristan, the biggest factor in this decision with Deshaun and this being a make or break year, for me, it's health. At the end of the day, it comes down to health. Deshaun Watson has been here for 2 seasons and has not played a full season's worth of games for the Cleveland Browns. That is nightmare scenario for this front office. That's nightmare scenario for Andrew Berry, for Jimmy Haslam. And, here's what I'll say. I cannot fairly evaluate Deshaun Watson. I just can't. I can't fairly evaluate if he's our guy or not. I don't know. I can't tell you. I've not seen enough of him. And the thing with Baker is, and not to bring that conversation back, but when we were evaluating Baker, you had 4 years worth of film, of tape, of time here as a Cleveland Brown, where he played 14 games, 16 games, 16 games, and then 14 games. And, obviously injury was in there, but you had years worth of film where you could go back and pick apart everything you wanted to. With Deshaun Watson, you quite literally have 12 games. And the first 6 were coming off of not playing for 2 years with a suspension. So, what are you getting out of those? And then this year, and I'll shut up, I know I'm rambling, but this year, off and on injury, and kind of a rough start. It was just, there's really nothing that you can take and say, okay, this is what Deshaun Watson is. You have the good, which is really good. If you get the Tennessee Titans game, Baltimore Ravens game, Deshaun Watson, that is your guy. That's the franchise. If that's how he plays and plays 16, 17 games next year, great. That's great. Awesome. That's what you traded for. However, you can't say that right now. And there's a big, giant question mark over this team because of that quarterback situation. I'm not here to tell you that he is the guy or he isn't. But what I will tell you, and this is the last thing I'll say, you have got to hold him to the standard of the 2020 season. 70.2 completion percentage, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That is the standard. Whether if he is that anymore or not, that's the standard. That is what you traded for. You're going into year 3 of being a member of the Cleveland Browns, or season 3, which is insane. Like, that is insane how fast time flies. But you have the system down at this point. The Browns, and we'll talk about it later, possibly going to help you out a little bit. But you know your guys. You have the certain, like Amari Cooper, is great. Nick Chubb and that whole, you know what I mean? But my point being, you have the system down. That's not an excuse. Baker had that excuse. He had a bunch of different systems. Deshaun, you don't have that excuse anymore. You have a good enough roster around you that I believe is going to be added to. You have the years in the offense. Now it comes down to just health. Stay healthy, play consistent. That is what it comes down to. And if Deshaun Watson is healthy, that's the standard. 2020 is the standard. I'm not accepting anything less. If he plays close to it, I'll be happy. But that is what your expectations should be. So with that being said, I'll shut up. Tristan, your turn.
Yeah. So again, it was a 2-part conversation. 2-part question, I should say. So number 1, will he be the starting quarterback next year? And I would say it's 90% likely. Yes, he's going to be. However, so before you said that there wasn't really a way that we could get out of it, and there is one way that we could get out of it. So this is according to overthecap.com. If the Cleveland Browns were to trade this offseason Deshaun Watson post June 1st or beforehand, but with a post June 1st designation, which pretty much just means the trade wouldn't go through until like June 1st. Mm-hmm. So the Browns would have a dead cap hit of $17.977 million, which would free up $46 million in cap space. So that is a way that you can get around this contract. That's quite possibly the only way. Probably the only way too.
You got to convince somebody though. Like, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, but also at the same token, for $46 million, I mean, Baker Mayfield's going to get around that money, possibly. We'll see. Kirk Cousins is going to get around that, if not more. So, and there's going to be a team that I think misses out on a quarterback and says, let's just take a swing at it, right? So, there could be a team that's desperate, right? Like the Panthers, they were desperate to get Baker Mayfield because they really missed on quarterbacks. But also their owner sucks. But, so we won't get into that. But so when we're addressing that, will he be the quarterback next year? Yeah, most likely, because, I mean, is the team going to want to take that $46 million, like you said? What are the realistic odds of doing that, right? Now, let's look at it from another example, right? So as far as him staying next year, if we restructure his deal, again, according to overthecap.com, you can save $33.5 million, almost 33.6. So really, you're freeing up, what's that, like possibly like 12 million more, 12 million, yeah, about 12 million more if you trade him post June 1st. And the thing is like, if you move off of him, you got to find somebody else to come in, because Joe Flacco, while it was magical what he did, and maybe it would have been a conversation if he won a Super Bowl for us, he's not a realistic option. If you're trading Deshaun Watson, you're not bringing in another quarterback that's the 45 to 60 million a year range, which is the type of quarterback you'd need to bring in my opinion. The only other option for me would be Justin Fields, if Chicago decides to move off of him for Caleb Williams. And who knows, maybe if Andrew Berry's really high on him, but again, like, probably it's a lot of risk. It's a lot of risk. And here's the thing with Deshaun. Deshaun Watson has played 12 games for the Cleveland Browns over the past 2 years. CJ Stroud played 15 this year. Last year, he joined at the very end of the season, in which the offense had completely molded to Jacoby Brissett and his skill set. And essentially it was, we're going to plug you into the same system that Jacoby did, right? And it didn't really work at all. There was no comfort. There was a lot of rust. It was an issue. And then this year, essentially cannot beat injuries, can't start more than 4 games in a row, right? You'll start 3 in a row, injured, start 3 in a row, injured, done for the year, right? So, for me, it's tough because I don't think that we've accurately seen what this guy can do over the course of a season. And I don't think that's fair to make this judgment without having seen him play a whole season. And listen, I get it. It is frustrating because we made this deal, we made this move so that way we could figure out, not even necessarily figure out, so that way we could have an elite quarterback that gives us a chance to win a Super Bowl. And what we saw this year was this team is a Super Bowl caliber team. It is. Because even with like a fourth of our cap on IR, we still made the playoffs. We still had the technically second best record in the AFC, right? Like, we were a successful team this year, a very successful team with all of the resilience that we had to have, with all of the issues that we had to overcome. And in the way that this defense played up until that Houston game, it was one of the best defenses in the league, arguably the best, so it shows you that the template is there for a Super Bowl winning team. It's there. The meat and bones are there. It's just about the joints and ligaments now, the small filler stuff. And we got a lot of that this year, but of course, when you have instability at the quarterback spot, it's going to be tough. And the biggest, most underrated aspect that I think you're going to see this next year, Deshaun Watson now sees on film what he can do to have success in this offense because of Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco came in, and turned the ball over a lot, but he made a lot of plays. And, you know, what it felt like for me with Deshaun this year was, I look back and I say, right, when was he at his absolute best in this offense? He was at his absolute best in this offense against the Titans and the Ravens. Now, the Ravens in the second half, let me say that.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing in those two games is, if you look back, Deshaun Watson, average depth of target, right? A-dot. He was not throwing the football down the field crazily in those games. He was finding his open guy and he was hitting him. And Kevin does a great job of scheming guys open in short yardage situations. And that's what you saw with Joe, was he was really effective with, David Njoku's wide open right here. Let me throw it to him. And then David would get like a 4-yard gain, or sometimes he'd get some room and he'd take it for 50.
I was going to say that yak. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, even with situations like throwing to Kareem Hunt in the flat, throwing to David Bell in the slot, he did a really good job of the short yardage passing plays and using the short yardage passing to open up the run game, which we saw against the Jets. Fortunately, with injuries in the run game this year, it's been tough, but with Nick Chubb, it makes it easier. But not only that, but the biggest thing we saw was the success in the short yardage passing game made the deep passing game very effective. Once when Flacco really got cooking, we were one of the top 5 teams in explosive plays. And when I look at those two Deshaun Watson performances that were the best, he was hitting his easy reads, he was throwing the checkdowns, and then when the deep shots were there, he was taking them and he was hitting them. And when I look at that Ravens game in particular, to me, it's ironic because Brett Coleman, after that game, ended up catching a lot of heat on Twitter because Deshaun obviously went 14 for 14 in the second half, had the 145 yards touchdown, right? Completely brought us back against the Ravens. Mm-hmm. And Brett Coleman came out and said, Deshaun Watson didn't even do anything spectacular. His A-dot was super low, right? And ironically enough, that's exactly what I think Deshaun needs to do. Mm-hmm. He needs to connect more on his short passes, because when he does that, he won't have to force the ball downfield. He'll find it open because people are going to be more worried about the underneath stuff. And that's what Joe Flacco did so well. And I think that's the template that Deshaun's got to be looking at Joe's film and saying, all right, he threw it for 45 times. 20 of his completions were easy money throws. And if you look at the bad games that he had, a lot of it was looking deep downfield, trying to force stuff, and it wasn't natural in the offense. And what we saw with Kevin this year, with Joe, is Kevin is a damn good play caller. And if he has a guy that plays to the strengths of the offense, takes the checkdowns, right, and then has the capability to make those big explosive plays, man. And so I really think this offseason and going into next season, if Deshaun Watson can stay healthy, look at that tape and realize, you know what, I was pushing the ball too much downfield last year. In those games that I was throwing shorter, I was finding a lot of success. But actually, and I kind of skipped over a part I was going to say about the Ravens game with Brett Coleman with the A-dot, right? Brett said that his A-dot wasn't that great in that second half. Well, Deshaun Watson had the fractured shoulder, which kind of explained why he didn't throw it deep downfield. But the offense was so much more effective with him throwing short. Mm-hmm. So that's my point entirely, is Deshaun, when he was in Houston before, had to be Superman. The offense relied on his explosive plays, relied on his legs to create time because his offensive line was not that great outside of Laramie Tunsil, obviously we know. And there was a lot of chaos around him, and the talent around him wasn't really good enough. So he had to be Superman a lot of plays. In Cleveland, he doesn't have to do that. He can hit his checkdowns, right? And then when the big plays are there, he can take them. And when there is situations where he needs to get out of the pocket, create space, create time, that's where Flacco really struggled. There were times where Flacco needed to create some time, create some space, and in some instances he did it really well, like the Jerome Ford touchdown, against the Jets. That was a unique one, but that's where a lot of Flacco's turnovers in my eyes came from. That and just missed throws and not reading the correct route. So for me, I look at this offense the way that it's constructed, and I look at what Deshaun's capabilities are. And I say, I think that he can have a big year next year. And I think it would be very short-sighted for us to give up on him after this year. I'm with you, Derek. This is the make or break year. We now have proof that Kevin Stefanski is a legit coach in the NFL. He's a legit coach, arguably top 10, arguably even top 5. Like, he had that good of a year this year, right? So we know that. We know this defense with Jim Schwartz now is really good. Really good. We know that Amari Cooper is a reliable number 1 target as a receiver. We know David Njoku has an elite potential at the tight end position, and he showed that this year. And of course, we've known for years that Nick Chubb is that guy, and we know the interior of this offensive line is spectacular. Hell, we even now know that we've got we can pick Jack Conklin or we can pick DeJuan Jones. Either one of them are going to step in and be great. There's a lot of things that we now know about this team that we can rely on. It's now up to him. Yep. And with the stability that's now around him, I think this is going to be a great year for him. I really, really do. I'm not gonna say numbers, because if I say numbers and he gets hurt or something like that, I don't want to be held accountable for numbers. But I think he is gonna come good next year. I really, really do. I really do. Give him a season. If he plays a full 16, 17 game season, I think by the very end of it, we'll look at it and say, this is the quarterback we got. All right. I'm confident with that. Yeah. So, but time will tell.
Yeah. So a couple things I wanted to mention on your points there. One of the biggest things, as far as I think it's fascinating. Like, if you're a football guy, or you're football fan, and you like the details and the nitty gritty of it, it's fascinating, the changes that this Browns offense went through over the course of this season. And for me, I think it's a lot. Like, there's Nick Chubb, the heart of your offense. I mean, say what you want about Deshaun Watson, should be the guy, whatever. Nick Chubb is the heart of the offense. Like, at the end of the day, you can always go with Chubb if things aren't going well. And bam, week 2, that's gone. Over the course of this year, so much changed, because pieces started leaving you, whatever. And the philosophy of how Kevin called the offense was very interesting. And for me, I think under Joe Flacco especially, and I'm glad you brought that up, Deshaun Watson, if I'm Deshaun Watson, I assume he has Flacco's number, and I'm sure they have somewhat of a relationship. I'm sitting down in a room, setting up a meeting, and I'm going to say, okay, Joe, I respect you. You obviously have done this at a high level. You're a veteran. Can you please walk me through? Can we sit down and review this together? And can we go over it? Because to your point, what I think, and I believe this with Kevin in general, because if you look at his quarterbacks and the relationships that he's had and the offenses that he's had with these different quarterbacks, Kevin Stefanski, I feel like when he gains a certain level of trust with you as a player, things change. And you mentioned it with Deshaun. I think Deshaun was trying to be Superman in an offense where he didn't have to be. And, that's what you said. With Flacco, to your point, it was interesting because it was, I don't have anything to prove. I don't need to be an MVP. I'm literally here to just do my job. And Flacco, while yes, finding his man and hitting the open guy for the most part, he was able to attack downfield. He just was. And we hadn't really seen that before Joe Flacco, other than Deshaun at times. And I think the reason is because, like you just mentioned, like, people don't understand. Football is like a game of chess. Like, you're setting things up for the future. Like, sometimes you'll run a play in your first drive. Like, let's just say, I don't know. A lot of times, like what offensive coordinators will do, they'll run like a comeback, and then they'll run a stop and go later. You know what I'm saying? So like where you'll see something similar before, you'll change it later, and it'll be open. That's just an example. Don't take that as gospel. Whatever. You get my point. But with Kevin, I feel like, he'll start off, and especially with Flacco, he'll start off and you'll do a little dinks and dunks, and you'll do the over intermediate passes, and you'll try to open things up. And Njoku, like you mentioned, was a big part of the yak. Those sorts of things. And then it starts clicking downfield. And that's when you have the Amari Cooper 2-touchdown, damn near 300-yard game against the Texans the first time. Because you can start doing that stuff. Once you see the little things and see what they're giving you, then you can start doing it. And for Deshaun, I think that's a huge part of next season. He has to look at this from a bigger picture. Okay, this is a situation I'm in, coming off of injury, whatever. I need to do my job. Like, I need to execute this offense the best way I can. And that's not always making the big play. Sometimes it's setting up for the huge right hook, middle to end of the game. Like, sometimes that's just what it is. And he has the ability to do it. Like Deshaun Watson, I went back and I watched his, not tape, but the good moments, the highlights. And you shouldn't just evaluate off of highlights. Don't do that, people. But Deshaun, at times, was able to attack downfield, was able to throw into tight coverage and make some big-time throws. And that's all well and good. But to your point, I think he needs to scale it back and start with the little things first. Start with the little things, figure out your guys, and then attack that way. Because if he does that, then that downfield passing becomes more consistent. And that's another thing too with Kevin. I think the Flacco era was really good for Stefanski as well as a play caller to mature, because I think he had, like I mentioned, a certain amount of trust with Joe Flacco, where he could kind of game plan for that counter punch later. And not that he didn't do that with Deshaun, but I think sometimes he played his cards too soon, maybe, and wasn't able to set up things. So yeah. But it's gonna be fun. There's so much, Tristan, that we can talk about for next year. There's so many different storylines. But I agree with you completely. I think if Deshaun Watson stays healthy, and let's just set a minimum, 15 games. Like, he plays 15 games. I think you see, like you said, I think you see that guy. And if the Browns do what I think they're going to do this offseason, man, like, I think we can get that guy. It's just, for me, there's a mental thing with Deshaun that I think he has to get over, and he has to get his confidence back. And he did. I think he started to. And unfortunately, when he started to, shoulder, see ya. Like, that was it. But
yeah, no. And not only that, but like, could you imagine, right? Like, could you imagine if this short passing game got very, very successful with Deshaun, right? And of course, the run game, when everybody's healthy, we know this is a top 2 run game. Imagine if you had a short passing game and a run game as effective as it could be, right? As we think the potential could be, right? Imagine how much the deep passing game opens. Mm-hmm. Imagine how much we would really see the value of somebody like a Marquise Goodwin then. Like, Marquise Goodwin would be like a type of guy that, maybe has like 5 receptions on the year, but like 250 yards. Like, yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, because he could blow the top off of a defense, right? And, for me, that is where, if Deshaun Watson can game after game, find a rhythm with the short passing game, RPOs, running game, obviously, play action. Like, this could be a very, very successful season for him. Because the thing is, in the most underrated part of Deshaun Watson's game, when crap hits the fan, he can buy time and he can make plays. We've seen it.
He's an improviser.
We've seen it happen.
Yep.
Yeah, he is. And so, imagine having strength in the area of the game where there's structure, and then being able to see the special moments in those improvising situations. Like, Josh Allen, man. Like, that's the type of guy I look at and I say, outside of the turnovers, Josh Allen should be what, in my eyes, what Deshaun tries to be next year. Because I don't see many differences between those two. Obviously, Josh Allen's got the arm strength that Deshaun doesn't have, but I'm talking about physical ability. As far as differences between two play style, I should say play style, they're very similar. So honestly, I really could see an explosion from Deshaun next year, but we'll have to see. And again, it could go the other way. It could be a terrible year for him. You never know. But regardless, I think you and me both agree that if he plays 15 games at least, we're gonna get a good quarterback. And this is his last chance. I think we can both agree on both of those things.
The scary thing, not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but the scary thing, thing with Deshaun is play is one thing, but injuries and body breaking down is another. Because Deshaun Watson's had 2 ACL injuries in his time playing football. One in college, I believe. One in the NFL. Now the shoulder. What?
Well, so the ACL, so one was in college and the other was his rookie year in the NFL.
Yes, I believe.
So, yeah.
But, so there's that, and now it's the shoulder. And this is my fear. I don't even want to put this out here. I don't even want to say it, but I think it needs to be said. Best case scenario, Deshaun Watson, like you mentioned, like we're talking about, can stay healthy, find himself, and get back to being, maybe not even what he was, but maybe just close to what he was. And that's fine. We don't need to have, the Deshaun Watson with the Texans where he had nobody and had to, like you said, improvise. But unfortunately, I think the worst case scenario is Deshaun Watson's heading towards Cam Newton. And that's scary. That is scary to me because Cam Newton is somebody who I think is a great, great quarterback. I think Cam Newton is a fantastic football player. And, I think he's going to always be remembered for being a really good football player, as he should. But the problem with Cam Newton was he was not willing to change his play style, and the injuries started piling up. And what made him successful was ultimately what made his downfall happen. And that's what scares me with Deshaun Watson is he plays a brand of football that is risky. And I don't think he needs to necessarily play that brand of football. And that's something he has to recognize, and that's something that he has to himself change. And I'm sure the Browns will say something to him. But if he doesn't, and you have another season where Deshaun Watson comes out and then starts to get on a roll, and then same as this year, he plays 5-6 games and then an injury again, I don't care if he's playing well or not. Like, at that point, it's like, hey, okay, you can't stay healthy. And that's what's unfortunate. And that's why I think the biggest factor at the end of the day with this whole thing is not his play. It's stay healthy so we can figure out about your play. So at the end of the day, that's what's important. So again, there's a lot of different directions this team could go in, but we're here for the ride. It's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, and speaking of different directions, I'm doing a killer job with the transitions today.
This is why you get paid the big bucks.
Absolutely.